So our first speaker today is Professor Chris Rowe, who's going to be talking about a representative sample survey of paranormal beliefs and experiences.
Thank you, Christine, for that succinct introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk to you today about a study that was conducted, I think it was during lockdown, so it was one of the few types of research that could still be conducted, an online survey. So I want to explain what that was about, and I want to thank the Perrott Warwick Fund. The vestiges of the funding that they give me was used to underwrite the costs in conducting the survey. The most important initial question is, well, why? What is the point of yet another survey? Don't we have plenty of surveys of paranormal belief and experience? Well, yes, we do, but they do different things, as I'll try and explain, and maybe there's a need to consider some of those things together. I think importantly, this kind of research can demonstrate the ubiquity and currency of paranormal beliefs and to establish that the paranormal is normal, that it occurs, beliefs are common among the general population, and that very often they're underpinned by personal experiences. Terms like paranormal and anomalous make our phenomena seem marginal, as if they're rare aberrations that are of little relevance to ordinary life experience. I'm involved in a number of case collections that show unequivocally that these experiences can be among the most important personal touchstones in people's lives, that they carry with them for many years as a source of comfort and solace as they kind of wrestle with the kind of slings and arrows of everyday living. These are the things that remind them of who they really are and their place in the universe. And it's a little bit unfortunate that they tend to be undermined by the mainstream academic community. I'm reminded of Andrew Greeley, who said that psychic and mystic experiences are frequent even in modern urban industrial society. The majority of the population has had some such experience. A substantial minority has had more than just an occasional experience, and a respectable proportion of the population has such experiences frequently. Any phenomenon with incidents as widespread as the paranormal deserves more careful and intensive research than it's received up to now. So that's the primary driver for this particular project. But additionally, it allows us to explore the degree to which people's beliefs around the paranormal are underpinned by direct personal experience, so we can explore that more explicitly, and to recognize which phenomena have the strongest a priori real-world plausibility, and so maybe should become the focus of more controlled laboratory-based research. In relation to that, we can identify any necessary or sufficient conditions for phenomena to occur spontaneously that might then dictate the conditions we want to bring into the laboratory. There's nothing new about that. I think it was certainly the philosophy of Louisa Rhine in the case collections that she reported on, that they were intended to inform experimental work at the Rhine Laboratory. And it certainly reflects a general position that I have in relation to laboratory-based work, that it must engender ecological validity. There must be this cycle between the real-world phenomena, the lived experience, and the kind of work that we do in the laboratory. I'm less impressed, I think, by very intellectually sophisticated and clever experiments that don't resonate with people's lived experience, that the kind of things that I can't really talk to ordinary people about, that can't really help them make sense of things that have happened to them. So if this is working effectively, it would mean that we start with real-world phenomena to characterize what it is that we're interested in and use that to characterize the way in which we interrogate that phenomenon in the lab. And the learnings that we have from the laboratory should be able to translate directly into feedback for the general public, that we can say things that make sense to them based on the experiences that they started with. Xenocard ESP guessing, for example, has never been terribly useful in helping people to make sense of their personal extrasensory perception experiences. So there's a lot of research looking at paranormal belief, in particular if we start with that, and surveys such as in the US, typically by the Gallup organization, show that belief in various paranormal phenomena is quite widespread. Although the samples are intended to be representative of the general population, the actual figures do vary from sample to sample, simply reflecting some degree of sampling error, or perhaps over time maybe generational change in the things that people notice or are interested in. But depending on the phenomenon, between a fifth and about a half of the people surveyed in these studies have reported belief in one or more of these various phenomena. So these are fairly widespread. Likewise, in the UK, Ipsos Mori is one of the main market research companies in the UK that conduct these weighted representative sample surveys that we can generalize to the wider population from more effectively. And without kind of hanging on the actual figures, we can again see that there's a wide range of belief in the same kinds of phenomena. You'll notice that the labels that are applied to the various topics change from survey to survey, and that's indicative of the sense that these companies have never really consulted parapsychologists to get a real good handle on the phenomena that they're attempting to map. So, for example, what do we really mean by premonitions/ESP? To what extent is premonitions distinct or separate from ESP? We wouldn't see it as such. Or that dreams can predict the future as a separate category besides premonitions. That wouldn't make sense conceptually for us, and so it makes it quite difficult for us as academics to make sense of the data that we're gathering from situations like this. Nevertheless, what's really useful about these UK national polls is that very often they go on to ask people about their personal direct experience. And a number of researchers, harking back to people like Sue Blackmore, for example, Tony Lawrence, have talked about how the main factor contributing to belief is direct experience. There are clearly quite strong correlations between belief and experience, and the presumption is that it's experience that gives rise to beliefs rather than vice versa from the work that's been done thus far. The UK polls that ask about experience, the first figures that you see here in red are the percentages of those who declared a belief in the phenomenon. Are the percentages of those people who declared a belief in the phenomenon who also said that they've had direct experience of it. So all those people who said, for example, I don't believe that reincarnation is a real phenomenon, are not included in these figures, because if you say, no, that doesn't exist, it doesn't make much sense then to say, have you had direct experience of reincarnation? But among those who've said, yes, I think that reincarnation is real, we find that only 8% of those have actually had direct experience of reincarnation. That's how to read those figures. And the figures in brackets are ones I've added, which is then the percentage of the population as a whole who report that kind of phenomenon. Okay. More recently, there's been an interest from a sociological perspective in paranormal experience. A nationally representative sample survey from Maddie Castro and colleagues, here's Robin Woofett, who got a mention earlier on. They again have reiterated this notion, following on from that earlier sense, that the paranormal is actually normal. Around about 37%, or 1/3 of the people that they surveyed, report at least one of these paranormal experiences. So the numbers are a little bit lower, but now we're talking solely about experiences, not about beliefs per se. Women are more likely to report such experiences. Prevalence is between 4 and 6% higher than for men, depending on the different topic area. But again, with this survey, we have a very narrow range of phenomena that are considered within the measure, and it's restricted to reported experiences and doesn't consider belief, so we can't see how those relationships track through. Neil Dagnall and colleagues at Manchester Metropolitan, they conducted a much wider survey. This is still not a representative sample survey, but it's a very large sample base, 1,215 respondents, a vast majority of whom are female. That's all already indicative of what we find in the field, which is that women are much more forthcoming about their paranormal beliefs and experiences. Men are much more reticent. So if you have a situation in which people can freely volunteer, men simply don't volunteer to take part in the first place. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether, when in a sense they're compelled to volunteer, within a kind of representative survey, do they still show lower incidence of belief, of prevalence of belief and of experience? Okay, so that's a kind of a whistle-stop tour through some of the previous research. People have touched on the notion of experience. Experience levels are quite high, and we want to understand a little bit more about them. I wanted to follow up on that by conducting an updated survey of UK levels of paranormal belief, particularly with a focus on looking at how belief and experience are related for those phenomena. to expand the range of phenomena so that it was more representative of what we understand as psi phenomena that are interrelated. Also, to provide people with more detailed descriptions or definitions of what we mean by a particular term, rather than relying on the presumption that people would ordinarily understand what it meant. One of my first publications in Parapsychology was a representative sample survey of Edinburgh residents back in 1997, and I was astonished to find that this was a postal survey, so I sent out cold letters to various people using an electoral register of people residents in the district. That I would send out the survey and people would write on the survey that they didn't understand fairly basic terms like extrasensory perception. As somebody who was completely immersed in this subject, it was astonishing to me, because it's in the media in various places, that there might be people that don't understand what those terms mean. Now I completely understand that that's the case, and we have to be very careful to ensure that the respondent's meaning coincides with our intention. So that's going to be a key part of what I share with you. But also, we had an opportunity with the YouGov survey I'm going to describe to you to follow up. So we would start by asking people, do they have a belief in a particular phenomenon? If the answer was affirmative, we can ask, do they have any direct experience of that phenomenon? And if, again, they respond affirmatively, we can then ask them if they're willing to share some details of that experience. So I've got a fairly rich qualitative database that, sadly, I won't have time to share with you today, but hopefully maybe next year at the PA. So we designed a questionnaire in consultation with YouGov. So it uses the omnibus survey tool. So this is a standard survey. They recruit a very, very broad pool of respondents who have agreed for a fee that they take part in various surveys. It's extremely well established. It's used for all sorts of marketing, but also kind of social assaying purposes to give responses to different surveys. They're randomly selected from that larger pool. And so it's a fairly fixed framework, so there's some negotiation that takes place in order to ensure that it covers the material I wanted to cover. In fact, the most negotiation was around an introductory statement that I kind of insisted would be included, because we wanted to ensure that people felt comfortable in disclosing beliefs and experiences and ultimately potentially sharing the nature of those experiences, that we weren't here simply to do some kind of a hatchet job to show how stupid the average Briton was, or that particular sectors were more stupid than other sectors. So we began by saying we are interested in your beliefs in and experiences of a range of phenomena that have been reported among people from a wide range of backgrounds and cultures. I wanted something much more stronger than that said that there's no evidence that this is related to mental health and so on. That's what we ended up agreeing with. So participants use a 5-point Likert scale to indicate the degree to which they agreed with statements. That's the standard format that they use. And I was able to cover a wide range of phenomena, including precognition, telepathy, psychokinesis, but also more applied work such as psychic claimants, looking at mediumship and paranormal healing in that set. I've already explained how if people believed, they would be asked about experience, and then they could follow up with their own personal experiences. That also extended to consultations. So if people said that they believed in mediumship, had sat with a medium, then they were given an opportunity to say something about that sitting. Or if they'd had a healing, a paranormal or anomalous healing, an energy healing, then they could tell us a little bit about the outcome of that healing. It was carried out online in 2019, which seems an awful long time ago now. The sample size was 2019 adults. That figure was chosen specifically because it was the year 2019. That's how YouGov works. And the data are weighted so as to be representative. Who knows what number of people they recruit these days, 2023. It's weighted so that you can generalize to the population as a whole with a margin of error of plus or minus 3%. Some of their surveys suggest it's plus or minus 2. We'll stick with the more conservative 3. And they have standard demographic data of the sort that Castro and colleagues also reported in their survey. So what kind of information did they give us? So here we've given you a fairly transparent set of data. You can see what percentage of people responded strongly agree through strongly disagree to each item. The main focus is on the net agree and net disagree figures at the end. As you might imagine, people who strongly or tended to agree are combined to give the agree figure. Those who tended to disagree or strongly disagreed are in the net disagree figure. So in order to make sense and generalize from these figures, I note that the Office for National Statistics estimates that the UK population in 2018, so just prior to this, suggested that there were 52.4 million adults in the United Kingdom. And given the way the weighted thing works, that allows us to generalize from that. So for example, if we look at precognition, so 31.3% of people agreed that precognition was possible, and that translates into 16.4 million people, we believe then, within the United Kingdom, believe that precognition is possible. For comparison, less than 1 million more people voted for Brexit, and look how that turned out. So building on the beliefs then, we want to see, well, how many people have had an experience of that sort? The figures are similar to before, so the percentages here relate only to those people who agreed to the fact of believing in that phenomenon. And so the figure in red in brackets is the percentage of the overall sample. So everybody who reports or claims to have had an experience of that particular type. So for example, 8.7% of this representative sample claims to have personally had an experience of telepathy, 13.3% an experience of precognition. I'm trying to see if I've got any generalized figures there. No, I don't for this page. And so on. So these figures are quite comparable then with the earlier surveys that we looked at. So for premonitions and ESP, the previous figures were 26.2% and 25.9%. Although precognition is a more restricted construct here. I separated out survival phenomena, and again, we've got a collection of questions. This gives you a flavor of how detailed some of the questions were in order to guide people a little bit. It might seem a little bit overwhelming, but it was to ensure clarity. So instead of simply saying that near-death experiences are real, we went on to say as part of the question, these are sensations that are experienced near the time of death, such as detachment from the body, seeing a tunnel of light, feelings of peace, and so on. And over 50% of this sample agrees that near-death experiences occur. Fewer, just under 41%, believe that there are unusual phenomena associated with the transition to death. And then 27.8% of people that someone who has died can communicate or interact directly with the living. This question is specifically to capture ADC type of experiences, so apparitional experiences, personal encounters, rather than ones mediated by a professional psychic or medium. And ghosts and spirits of the dead can come back in certain places and situations. It's more related, obviously, to hauntings rather than an ADC-like experience. And again, the more important page for me is the survival page that relates to personal direct experience. So we have 6% of the sample claiming experience of an NDE, personal experience, and that translates to 3.2 million people in the United Kingdom who will have had an experience they interpret as being a near-death experience. I think that's really important. Some surveys previously haven't really, in my view, effectively differentiated between being near death, so having an experience that occurred near death, and having an experience that was transcendent in some form, that would be an NDE of the sort that we're interested in. We were very explicit about that, and nevertheless, we have 6% of the population who are reporting that kind of experience. Nearly 11% of people have experienced unusual phenomena near the time of death. 8.2% have communicated or interacted directly with someone who has died. These are enormous numbers of people, and yet we're very used to encountering people who've had an ADC and believe they're the only person who's ever had this experience, that they're going crazy. There are millions of people in the United Kingdom alone who have shared that experience that you're reporting, or have been in the presence of or seen a ghost. There may obviously still be some overlap between these different categories because we can't kind of be inside the heads of the people who are responding. So we wanted to follow up then, so we've got some questions also about soliciting mediumship, for example, or healing. So we start with the question, mediums or people who are said to be able to obtain messages from the spirit world do have a genuine ability to communicate with the dead. The figure's relatively low, 18% of people, but again, think about how many people that translates into. I don't think the media helps with the portrayal of mediums generally. Of those who responded affirmatively, so of that 18%, over half had personal experience of sitting with, consulting a medium, maybe being in the audience of a platform demonstration. So a substantial, I don't want to say majority, it is a majority, but only just, but a substantial number of the people who are positively disposed to mediumship are basing that on direct personal experience. So we followed this through to ask a little bit more about the nature of their experience with mediums. And of those people who had personal experience, an overwhelming 78.6% felt that the communication that they had received was accurate, and just under 75% found that the communication would be helpful. So we've since built on that. Ewan McLean, one of the PhD students working at the University of Northampton, has conducted a more focused survey on sittings with mediums by clients, and we look at 4 different dimensions in relation to the consultation. Because, of course, a medium can give a statement that's accurate without it being terribly impressive. If the medium says you have 2 eyes and 2 ears but only 1 nose, that's very specific and it's accurate, but you're not going to be blown away by that as information. So other categories are also important. So how personally meaningful is that information? How helpful is it in you moving forward and managing your grief, for example? Those are important dimensions that we explore in that other survey in a bit more detail. Oh, have we done that one? No. Okay, so with near-death experiences, we also have well, we've done near-death experiences, haven't we? Yeah, that must be repeated. Okay, so we also did the same with psychics and fortune tellers. This is rather an uncomfortable category, but it was important for us in speaking to lay people about the nature of their experience that we address both of those together. It's quite common in those Gallup and Ipsos Mori polls previously for the questions to ask about fortune tellers as a category. So we wanted to make sure that we had some kind of point of contact with those previous data. So we have this broader category. Some psychics and fortune tellers have a genuine ability to know about a person's past and predict their future. And a slightly higher figure of 21.1% of people agreed that that is possible. And of those people who agreed, a third of them had actually consulted a psychic or fortune teller at some point. And that separated out to a third, and actually nearly 40% in the case of a psychic for a reading. And again, we asked them to tell us a little bit more about the nature of that communication from the psychic or medium. The figures are not quite so overwhelming as they were from mediumship, but a majority of people believed that the information that they were given was accurate and helpful in all of those cases. Again, this information is really important, I think, to put into the public domain, because there's a general sense that people are quite credulous when they sit with mediums and psychics, that they're willing to accept any kind of tiny morsels of information as evidential because of their grief and their need for evidence that the person continues to survive in some form. Certainly from Ewan's survey, there's a lot more evidence to suggest that people are much more critical in their consumption of this kind of material, that they're actually much more wary and they need much more compelling evidence before they're swayed by it. There's a lot of variety out there. We all know of people who will accept any kind of message at all during a kind of a mediumship demonstration. Anything is for them. So we know that there are people like that. But on the whole, people are quite discriminating in wanting to make sure that the information fits for them. So I looked at some comparisons with earlier research that I'd done back in, the work was in 97, it was published in Jasper in 1998. And the picture is really quite broadly similar. So 29.5% of my 98 sample had visited a medium or psychic, and we have 25% here. So the figures are rather similar. And the same kind of criteria in terms of how accurate, or in this case truthful, and how useful the information was. People were very positively disposed to the information they received, so that was encouraging. I also looked at healing, particularly non-contact anomalous healing of different sorts through mental intention alone. We tried to be quite broad here, so we included spiritual healing, Reiki, therapeutic touch, and hopefully people would recognize one or other of those terms. If this was something that they had experienced personally, they could actually get a sense that, yeah, this also applied to them. So if they'd experienced Joe Ray, which isn't on the list, they could actually see we're talking to them too. And 27% of the sample believe that non-contact healing by some complementary means is possible. And of those, then 27%, just under, have personally visited a healer for healing. So that's 7.3% of the whole population have visited a healer at some point in time. Thinking about your most recent visit with the healer, did you find that helpful? And again, an overwhelming 84% of people believe that it was helpful to them. I mentioned earlier the gender effects, certainly in terms of volunteering information about paranormal experiences and beliefs. In a situation like this, we've got a captured audience, so people are part of a pool who respond because, in one sense, they're employed by YouGov or these other market research companies. So we have approximately equal numbers of men and women in this sample. And nevertheless, when we ask people about these various phenomena, we find that women present as being more believing than men for a large number of the phenomena, all the ones in red. I think it's 6 out of 11 dimensions. Women scored significantly higher than did men. And that does beg the question as to whether there are sex differences in terms of sensitivity to or openness to these kinds of experiences. This could still be kind of the Steve Martin man with two brains notion that some men, no matter how vivid the psychic information, they still refuse to see it. If you've not seen the movie, then that won't make much sense. I apologize. But so there may be something about that we are equally exposed to those stimuli, but we don't notice them in quite the same way. It's not simply a volunteering effect. There are no age or generation effects with this. Sometimes it's found that belief in survival actually falls away slightly in older age. We don't have any evidence of that in this particular sample. And what do we conclude from this generally, with time running out? Well, the paranormal still seems to be normal. It is a feature of a very large number of people's lives. They have beliefs about these phenomena and they have direct experience of them. The levels of belief range from 15% all the way up to just over 50% in this sample. Personal experience ranges from a low of 2%, which is for PK phenomena. That again is very consistent in previous surveys, all the way up to 14% of people who all have reported one particular form of experience. Women have scored higher than men on all belief items, significantly so for 6. And I hope to share with you the qualitative data at a future conference, wherever that may be. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chris, for that. Chris opted for a slightly longer talk with less time for questions, so we have actually about 2.5 minutes for questions, so probably one very quick question. Over there.
Thank you. This is really fascinating. 2019 was right before we had a massive change. I wonder if you have any plans to repeat that, because I would suspect from everything I'm seeing that the numbers would be higher on all counts.
I agree with you. I have the same suspicion. We don't really have a budget for that at the moment. But I was actually talking to Wolfgang earlier about possibly... is it Wolfgang? Wolfhard? Wolfgang. Talking to Wolfgang earlier about possibly doing something with the EXI scale, and it would be a great opportunity maybe to revisit some of these standard items as well as part of that. So yeah, that would be a great idea.
We have, in fact, 1 minute, so we could squeeze in a teeny tiny question if anyone has a small question.
Again, fascinating study. I'm just curious if you have seen anywhere where you would, when you had that table showing when people had an experience with the mediums or the psychic, healers, et cetera, where did they find the information accurate, and then did they find the information helpful? Have you ever seen something where you could then put in a table that information, compare it to how did they find their session with their psychotherapist, with their doctor, with their blah, and then see, oh, well, isn't that an interesting comparison if they,
Absolutely. So these are not mutually exclusive dimensions. I think they will overlap for some, but not necessarily for all. And that would be interesting. And absolutely, it would be interesting to compare with other forms of support for people as to whether this actually fares better or worse on average. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, perfect timing, in fact. So thank you very much to Chris Rowe for that fascinating presentation.